Hi, I'm Gary Wilson. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of animal training. Let me get this going. All right. So Kelly Elkins asked me to do this presentation, and I suspect she figured I was a good one to do it since I'm old. And I am old, I guess. My aunt and grandmother died in the flu pandemic of 1918. Give you some idea. My first job with animals was 46 years ago. This is me with an African lion named Major that I worked with. This past July, I retired from Moorpark College after teaching for 41 years. I'm still active. I help out, volunteer at some wildlife education places. In fact, I was helping one just a couple of weeks ago with a fundraiser, and that was for conservation ambassadors. And this is me at that event. One of the principals there, Gabe Kirshner, he just thought it was hilarious that the guy who taught capture and restraint at Moorpark College for decades was responsible for one of the smallest animals they had there, Western screech owl. Okay, so why look at history of animal training? French philosopher Auguste Comte said, to understand science, it is necessary to know its history. When you start working with an animal, you want to know the history of that animal, right? You want to know how it was raised, what experiences it had, how it's going to respond to different stimuli, right? When I worked at the Navy Marine Mammal Program, the program was classified, and it was difficult to find out about history of the animal you were working with. My animal had a strange reaction to sailboats, and I didn't know why. It took me some digging. They said, well, you don't have the need to know, so I couldn't look at past records, but I managed to talk to a trainer who'd been there for a while, and he was able to clue me in on what was happening. So you want to know about the history of your animal. Also, you want to know about the history of this technology that we use to train animals. H.G. Wells said human history in essence is the history of ideas. And rather than focus on dates and particular things like that, that you might think about as history, I want to talk about ideas about animal behavior and animal training, because the two things are tied together quite a bit. So our ideas about what training is influence us as a trainer. So we need to know where those ideas come from, so that you can constantly evaluate your understanding of those concepts and their application. You want to think about whether a particular idea makes sense in light of your own experience, as well as things you learn in presentations like this, or conferences, or just on the job. And you want to be aware of your own biases and how they might be in conflict with some concept. And is that getting in the way of applying, effectively using some technique? Ken Ramirez wrote, before we actually begin training an animal, we must recognize that we bring many biases to a training session. Some are personal and others are part and parcel of being human. These traits are not in and of themselves a bad thing, but we must know how to recognize them and understand how they affect our ability to train the animals under our care. The ideas we have about training will influence our approach to training. For example, I've known Jennifer Zelligs for many years. Dr. Zelligs has let me bring my students to her facility and see her work with sea lions. And she's come to Moorpark to talk to my students. Her book on training is one of the textbooks I've used in my classes. But Jen and I differ in our approaches to training. I think Jen wants the animal to look to her for direction when it's unsure about what it's supposed to do. Whereas I want the animal to make some decisions on its own. And the training I've done hopefully will set it up to make the right choice. Jen and I are both using operant conditioning. We're using the same technology, but how we apply this technology is a little bit different. It is probably because I'm lazier than Jen, but also when she has a sea lion in the open ocean, it's probably a good thing for the animal to look to her for direction. It's maybe more likely that the animal will stay with Jen and come home with her at the end of the day. Now, I trained a dolphin in the open ocean for the Navy, and this is the dolphin I trained. I needed him to come home with me every day also, and he did. Actually, once he decided to go home without me. That's another story. I was training him to locate mines. I needed him to scan the environment and make a decision. Is a mine present or not? So he had to have that training that he could make that decision on his own. And that's what we needed him to do. So that probably influenced my approach to training. I'm sure it influenced my approach to training, that experience. And so you need to think about your own experiences and how they've influenced how you approach training. So as I mentioned, the study of the history of animal training is tied to the history of the study of animal behavior. Humans have tried to understand an animal's behavior so that they could change its behavior to benefit the person. Much of this is involved domesticated animals. Now we try and change the animal's behavior to benefit the animal also, or even primarily. So as behavioral managers, we strive to help the animal to live in its environment under our care. For most of human history, the way people have looked at animal behavior has been through the lens of anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is attributing human feelings and motivations to animals. That is explaining the animal's behavior as if it thought and reacted the same way as a human would in the same situation. For example, the lion is lazy because it sleeps so much is an anthropomorphic interpretation of the lion's behavior. We're exposed to this all the time. Cartoon animals look like and act like people, right? And this cat is obviously grumpy. The problem with anthropomorphism is that in most cases, animals and humans do not think in the same way. We've evolved under different evolutionary pressures, and those have resulted in us having different priorities. So it's difficult to equate human thinking and animal thinking. I think it's pretty common experience that in general, people don't like being told what to do. Many years ago, when we bought the house that I'm in right now, we needed to pour some concrete slabs, and I hired one of our maintenance guys from Moorpark College who had done a lot of the work on our zoo. And I hired him to help with that, pouring those concrete slabs. And so he'd come over after work and we'd work. One night, I remember we were preparing the ground for these concrete slabs and we were removing some dirt, right? And at one point he says to me, you know, it's easier if you dig it out this way. And my initial reaction was, well, screw you. I know how to dig. I have a master's degree. But I suppressed those thoughts and I looked at what he was doing and then I tried it. And sure enough, he knew what he was talking about. It was easier to dig the way he was showing me how to dig. But I just, give that as an illustration that people don't like to be told what to do. Anthropomorphism is a natural way to think about animals' behavior. Our own experience is the only real frame of reference we have to interpret the behavior of an animal. So oftentimes people assume that the animal doesn't like being told what to do either. And in order to get it to do what we want it to do, we have to dominate it. If an animal is not complying, it must be trying to dominate us. So, for example, many years ago when I started teaching at Moorpark, we had a tiger named Ganges. And back then, when I first took over, excuse me, the animals weren't really trained in the summer. They were just free fed, and then training lab took place in the fall and spring semester. So, a student that was assigned to Ganges was first going to evaluate how this cat did with behaviors that had already been trained. So the trainer went and got the training records, and she saw that Ganges had been trained 5 behaviors previously. So the training record, of course, described the cues and the criteria for the behavior. So she got Ganges food, and she went to her enclosure, and she asked for each of those behaviors. And Ganges performed great. She did all those behaviors flawlessly. And the student was thinking, wow, this semester is going to be easy. This cat's really smart, remembers all this stuff. I'll be able to build on those things. The next day, she goes back to do another training session. And this time, Ganges does all the behaviors but one. Won't do that behavior. The student tries and tries to get Ganges to do that behavior, but she won't do it. So she leaves finally. She comes back the next day, again, asking for those behaviors, and Ganges does all the behaviors except for 2 now. And so you can see where this is going. Each day, the cat did less and less, and the student was really frustrated. By the end of the week, the student comes to me, and she says to me, Ganges is testing her. And I said, what do you mean? Why do you say that? She says, well, she obviously knows how to do these behaviors, but she's refusing to do them. And I said, well, when you say testing, though, you're implying that she's trying to, it's a contest of wills. She's trying to get the upper hand with you. And if we were talking about a monkey or an ape where dominance is more of an issue, then that might be the case. But with a tiger, I don't think so. So let's think about a little bit more about what this animal has experienced in its life recently. It spent all summer doing no behaviors. It was just free fed for the behaviors. You then went and asked it for the behaviors, and it did all of them correctly, and it got some food for doing the behaviors, and then you left. Also, during the summer, it was just getting free fed, but it wasn't getting a lot of attention. What happens when it does the behaviors? You reward it and you leave. If it stops doing the behavior, what happens? You stay there and you try and try and try to get it to do the behavior. So it's getting more attention. I would suggest that the cat is working more for the attention than for the food. The food's not that important. It's been free fed all summer long. Most of our animals at Moorpark College are fat and happy. And so she can go without some of her food, but attention is maybe a stronger reinforcer. So I suggested to the student, we can test this idea. So now when you go and do a session with the cat, give her the cue for a behavior, and if she does it, reward her with food, but also reward her with attention. Make a big deal about it. Give her praise her, give her a lot of attention for doing the behavior. But if she doesn't do a behavior, instead of staying there and giving her more attention as you try and get her to do the behavior, take the food and walk away. Take a little time out and then come back later and try again. So the student reluctantly, she said, well, I don't know. I think the cat is testing me. I said, okay, but try this, please. And so the student went and she tried this approach. Reinforcing the cat with attention and food when it did the behaviors. And within a week, the cat was doing the behaviors again, fine. And so the the reason I tell you the story is it illustrates, we have this innate bias that we don't like being told what to do. We think that the animal needs to be dominated, subjected, compliant to our will, as it were, and that can influence how we interpret what is going on. And it can lead us to some bad decisions. So the danger, big danger, is the trainer tries to do more and more with the animal in terms of forcing it to comply, and that can destroy the trust any trust animal has in the trainer, and it can certainly lead to aggression toward the trainer. I think anthropomorphism leads to common misconceptions about animal training held by the general public, right? That the trained animal is performing correctly, therefore the trainer must have forced it to comply, right? In the 1960s, there was a trainer in Hollywood, a studio animal trainer named Ralph Helfer, who came up with this idea of affection training. Now, he was training the animals with food reward and affection and attention, those kind of things, like everybody else was doing. But he recognized that the general public had this perception that animals were being forced to do behaviors when they were working on camera, and so he proactively got out there and said, no, we're training the animals for affection. Well, the scientific approach to the study of animal behavior is, like I said, tied to the way we train animals. And one of the first ideas that got us away from anthropomorphism was contributed by Charles Darwin. And Darwin proposed that behavior was influenced by natural selection, right? So we associate Darwin with this idea of evolution through natural selection. And when most people think about evolution, they think about the form of an animal, the coloration of an animal, the shape of a finch's beak, for example. But Darwin proposed that behaviors could have evolved, and it got people thinking about, well, how does that happen? What are the selection pressures which influenced the evolution of the different behaviors? So that was a crack in the looking at things just through anthropomorphism, a different way to look at stuff. And I'll come back to natural selection here in a little bit. The next development in the study of animal behavior was the rise of two competing approaches in the early part of the 20th century: experimental psychology and ethology. So these are two different schools of thought about how to study animal behavior. Experimental psychology was founded in America by these two guys, J.B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, among other people, but these are names that we know. And experimental psychology was mainly concerned with how learning takes place. How does behavior change after practice, reward, or punishment? So the experimental psychologists work mainly with animals under controlled conditions in the laboratory, rats and pigeons primarily. Okay. Ethology was founded in Europe by these guys, Konrad Lorenz and Nico Tinbergen. And the ethologists studied a wide range of animals in natural or near natural settings. Lawrence had a big ranch, a big farm, and he, had animals there, and they had natural areas there, and he would study animals on that facility. The ethologists were concerned with external stimuli that trigger behavior, and the basic question of how is the behavior adaptive? How does it help the species? And they saw most behavior as being instinctive. that was built in to the animal. Well, those two different schools of thought have led to sort of two main approaches to the teaching of animal behavior. So sometimes some universities offer animal behavior in the psychology department, and there the focus is on learning and cognition. And other universities will offer it in the biology department, where the focus is on adaptiveness of behavior in an area called behavioral ecology. Some places use a interdisciplinary approach and incorporate the best of both. The biggest difference between those two approaches is that biologists typically put more emphasis on evolution through natural selection. And I was trained as an evolutionary biologist. I trained dolphins first. I learned how to care for animals and train animals. And then I went back to school and became a biologist. So I've brought that evolutionary perspective to thinking about the behavior of animals. Let me give you an example. I was in a discussion one time, many years ago, with one of the well, it was a facility that had mainly a marine mammal facility, and it had recently gotten some terrestrial animals. And they had a capuchin monkey. And this colleague that I was talking to said that the trainer of the capuchin monkey had come to him and said that they thought that the capuchin monkey needed a companion. And he asked why. And the trainer said, well, the capuchin monkeys are social animals. And this colleague's response was, well, they are in the wild, but they don't have to be. And I said, well, they kind of do, in that over the history of the species, those monkeys that went off on their own, marched to a different drummer, they got eaten by a jaguar or a mountain lion. There's advantages to living in a group. That's why we see groups of animals. That's why some animals overcome the disadvantages of being in a group to take advantage of those things that help, and that's oftentimes in avoiding predation. So over the history of the species, then those capuchins that stayed with the group did better, right? And they passed on their genes to the next generation. Those who went off and got eaten by somebody, by a jaguar, they didn't pass on any genes. So now it's normal, it's natural for a capuchin monkey to feel anxious, we might say, feel that urge to be with other animals. If it's alone, it's going to feel anxious. Now, could we train the animal to be alone? Sure. We could train the animal to ignore that urge to be with other animals. But it's difficult because we're going against this built-in innate desire that has developed through natural selection. But we can train animals to accept discomfort, uncomfortable things. For example, a needle stick of an injection or a blood draw. So we're training the animal to overcome their natural urge to avoid pain. So it should be possible to teach them to accept discomfort or anxiety that is a result of being away from the group. How would we do that? We'd do it the same way as training a needle stick, right? We'd gradually increase the level of discomfort, start from a place of no discomfort and gradually increase the level of discomfort and reinforce the animal for not reacting to it. In the case of with the animal leaving the group, this is what we call separation training, right? So let me go back. So we're teaching the animal to accept that anxiety or discomfort it has from being separated from the group. So we start with the animal in the group where it feels comfortable. We then move the animal a short distance away, targeting or something like that. And we do that for a short period of time. And we reinforce for not reacting to being separated, for not showing signs of anxiety. We gradually increase the separation distance and the duration. So through this process, we're teaching the animal that it's worth it to experience that discomfort, that they can earn reinforcement for accepting that. Well, most of the time, what we're actually dealing with is an animal that is alone because it's been sort of accidentally separated from the group. We have a newborn animal rejected by its mother or orphaned. We have a adult animal that's remaining, after the rest of the group has passed away, or an animal that's rescued from the illegal pet trade, something like that. So in any case, we have to deal with the psychological consequences of this unmet need of being with the group. So many times we provide behavioral enrichment to address the atypical behavior resulting from these unmet needs. Sometimes the trainer can serve as a substitute, right, for that companionship, that needed companionship. But it's difficult to do. This is a gibbon that was raised by herself in a pet store that lives at Moorpark College now, and it was attempted to integrate her into groups of gibbons at 3 different zoos, all without success, because whenever the animal was exposed to other gibbons, she would start self-mutilating. She just had never developed those social skills or so here's an animal that has the need to be with others, but she thinks that she needs to be with humans and not with gibbons. So it's really difficult for the human to step in and really be that substitute, right? Because we can't be there all the time. So let's talk about taking evolution into account when we're training. Considering evolution of behavior can help us make training and management decisions. So if we have a group living species and we need to move individuals for breeding purposes, right? We're going to take an individual out of the group. Well, what does it mean to consider evolution? In most social mammals, for example, usually one sex leaves its natal group, the group it was born into, before sexual maturity, and then it looks for another group to join. Excuse me. So if we're going to move an animal from a group and send to another facility, or even another group in the same facility, it might be advantageous to think about, well, which sex is the one in the wild that usually leaves the group? It's going to be better adapted for that kind of situation. The reason we believe that this behavior has evolved, that one sex leaves a group, another stays, is that this reduces the chance of inbreeding, right? Breeding between close relatives and all the detrimental genetic impact that has. So in most species, it's the males that leave their natal group. Not in every species, so you have to look at what species you have to think about what species you're working with. But like I said, most mammals, it's males. So if you need to move an individual to another group for breeding, either, like I said, at your facility or another facility, a male is likely going to experience less anxiety from being removed from the group. It's also probably going to be easier to train a male to separate from the group and learn to go into a crate to be transported. The males have evolved the psychological adaptations which make leaving the group easier. Here's another example in regards to cues or SDs, right? Discriminative stimuli. So we had a leopard at Moorpark College that student comes to me and says that the leopard doesn't really seem to understand the cues for two of the behaviors that it has been trained. These two behaviors were behavior sitting and behavior rising up. So sitting is just like I said, from a standing position, your butt on the ground. Rise up was from that sitting position or standing, but usually sitting, where it would rise up and put its paws on the front of the enclosure. So I asked the student, well, what do you mean the cat seems to not know the cues? He says, well, when I give the cues, it may, if I give the cue for sit, it may sit or it may rise up. If I give this cue for rise up, it may sit or rise up. It's kind of random. And I said, well, what are the cues? Well, the cue for sit was a closed fist, while the cue for rise up was just the fist with one finger extended. Okay? So I suggested that maybe it's difficult for the cat to see the difference between those two things. Cats are predators, and their visual system is adapted for detecting movement because that's often a good cue that there is a prey available, right? Perhaps the cat isn't seeing the difference between the closed fist and one finger extended, and it knows the behaviors, but it doesn't know those cues because those cues are too difficult for it to discriminate. So I suggested that they change the cues, incorporate some movement. So maybe make the cue for sit with the fist moving back and forth, and the cue for rise up. Go ahead, if you want to extend that finger, that's fine, but then move your hand up and down and make it really different. Incorporate movement into the cue so that it makes it more likely for the cat to be able to discriminate those two cues. And when the student did that, it worked. It helped. Then it was easier for the cat to understand. The cat was trying, it was doing the behaviors, but it was just kind of guessing at what it was being asked to do. Another way that we can see how an understanding of evolution of behavior can help us is in the topic of constraints on learning. So here's B.F. Skinner. And Skinner's research gave us many of the concepts of operant conditioning that we use in training animals, right? Skinner thought operant conditioning could be used to shape pretty much any behavior. And he published the results of his operant conditioning experiments in a book called The Behavior Organisms. Published that in 1938. Well, two of his students, Marion and Keller Breland, took the operant conditioning information, the science, right? And they were among the first to apply that science of operant conditioning to training animals for commercial purposes. They started a company called Animal Behavior Enterprises. And they successfully trained animals for promotions, advertisements, for shows, plays, film, etc. But they ran into some problems where the operant conditioning theory didn't seem to explain what was going on. And so they published a paper called The Misbehavior of Organisms. They published it in 1961. So they found situations in which the contingencies of reinforcement did not entirely succeed in controlling the behavior of the animals. So let me talk about one of those instances. So this was the thing that became called the miserly raccoon. So here, the goal behavior was for a raccoon to pick up coins and deposit them in a 5-inch metal box, a piggy bank, basically. right? So raccoons have really good manual dexterity, as good as humans in terms of using their little digits on their front feet. And so they easily condition the raccoon to pick up the first coin. But when they shape the behavior putting the coin into the box, the raccoons seem to have trouble letting go of the coin. Pick it up, fine, but then put it in the slot in the box. He'd put it in, but he'd pull it back out and put it back in, and then he'd pull it out, and he'd finally drop it in and then get reinforced. So that extra behavior of pulling the coin back out, all that stuff delayed him getting reinforced. This didn't make sense from what Marianne and Keller Breland had learned from Skinner. They finally got him putting one coin in the box, and then they tried to introduce a second coin. It would be a fixed ratio 2, we would say, where an animal had to pick up 2 coins and put them in the box. And here the behavior totally fell apart. And this is where the miserly raccoon idea comes from, in that the raccoon would pick up the coins and rub them together in his paws like a miser, thinking about his wealth. So as the Brelands thought about this, they were trying to figure out, well, what's going on here? Why is the operant conditioning not working? And they, what they saw was that they were training the animal to perform a specific response that then gradually drifted into an entirely different behavior. And the different behavior was an instinctive behavior. So they called this phenomenon instinctive drift. So raccoons are animals that forage in the water. They, catch crayfish and other aquatic crustaceans in the water. And that's why they need that great manual dexterity to feel around for things and catch those things in the water. And so the behaviors that the animal was going from, of picking up coins and putting in the box, was going to this natural foraging behavior. And so it appeared that the coins were being associated with the food, and they would trigger those foraging behaviors. And so when the animal got into that mode of foraging, then it didn't make sense for it, in a way, for it to get rid of the coin, right? If it was in the normal situation in the stream, it would grab a crayfish and it would eat it, right? It would pull that out, rub it together to break its exoskeleton, and then eat it. And it wouldn't throw it away, right? That wouldn't make any sense. That wouldn't be adaptive. So that's what the Brelands were seeing. So this falls under this idea of constraints of learning, right? There's certain things that are easier to learn and some that are hard to learn. And it's the adaptive behavior, the natural behavior that the animal has evolved over time, that can interfere with the training. What's the solution in this case? Well, I don't know if anyone's really tried it. At Moorpark, we've trained raccoons to pick up things and put them places. Usually, like it's a ball, putting it in a basket, or we trained one to do recycling, right? Pick up a can and put it in, open a container and put it into the recycling container, that kind of thing. We've been able to do that, but we also teach them to pull the thing back out, and they'll do that on their own. So I think maybe the solution in this case would be to find a non-food reinforcer to shape the behavior, right? If the animal it's triggering the association between the coins and the food is triggering the natural foraging behavior, then if we can avoid triggering that behavior, we can maybe get the performance without this instinctive drift. So found a non-food reinforcer, like maybe tactile or praise, or even giving access to a puzzle box that didn't have food in it but was just interesting, the opportunity to reach into something and feel a different texture, that might be reinforcing for the raccoon that wouldn't stimulate that natural foraging behavior and wouldn't result in the instinctive drift. So, in conclusion, let me say that as we've thought about history of animal training, ideas about training have changed over time, and it's instructive to see that progression. You want to be constantly evaluating your understanding of training concepts, right? And so that you're incorporating new information, you're adjusting what you do based on your experience also, and maybe you find some things work better with some animals than others, right? You got to be constantly evaluating that. Anthropomorphism, the way a lot of people naturally look at behavior, is a natural thing to do, but frequently wrong, right? It's often a wrong way to think about behavior and training. So we have to guard against that because it's a natural thing for us to do. And evolution through natural selection can provide insights for animal behavior management. So I think it's worthwhile to think about the evolutionary history of the species that you're working with, what they are adapted for and what they're not adapted for, and keep that information in mind as you are training and caring for these animals. All right, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I think we're going to have a mechanism here for you to submit questions that we can address. And hope to see everybody at the ABMA conference in Atlanta in March. I'm really looking forward to that. All right. Thank you very much.